Well, thank you for joining us this morning. We get into the papers. We'll shortly be joined by the Executive Director for the Media Foundation for West Africa, Suleimana Brima. But for now, let's get into the papers that we have. And so many of them, but interestingly, on a day like this, we're missing the Daily Graphic and the Ghanaian Times, in fact. But let's start with the papers we do have. The Finder newspaper to kickstart matters. Majority downplays minorities' injunction on e-levy implementation. If you followed that discourse, you would have noticed that three stalwarts of the minority NDC, I'm talking about the minority leader Haruna Idrisu, Mahama Ayariga, and as well Okujato Ablakwa, the Member of Parliament for North Tone, have come together to put that motion forward at the Apex Court, seeking to stay the start or the rollout of the e-levy on May the 1st. And this will be 3 clear days of, the start. But the majority has downplayed the situation. Let's find out exactly what the majority leader has been saying. He has emphasized the attempt by the 3 MPs of the minority to place an injunction on the implementation of the e-levy. And he says the minority leader, of course, we know the 3 that I mentioned have filed an application at the Supreme Court for an injunction. But at a press conference in Parliament, Mr. Oseiche Mensah Bonsu, a majority leader, described the move by the NDC MPs as dangerous since there were internal parliamentary processes they could have resorted to. He, however, stated that the e-levy would be implemented as announced and that nothing could stop it. So that is the majority leader there. This is what he's been saying. Let me say a very good morning to Suleimana Brima, Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. Good morning, sir.
Benjamin.
It's a real pleasure having you. How's your Monday going thus far?
Well, thanks for having me. I think that is a good start to the week. Ramadan gradually coming to an end, and that's something that is quite pleasing. So we are on.
A lot of us have celebrated the fact that, it doesn't always happen. Ramadan and Easter coinciding. So these are happy times on a religious level, at least for us. And yes, we want to see the Ramadan through and for our inter-religious unity to continue. But I just started with the Finder newspaper and the first story. That's not what I would have started with you on, but since I've already got into it, the majority is downplaying the minority's injunction on the e-levy's implementation. Tell me, Suleimana, people have complained about our readiness still. You would recall that engineer Dr. Kenneth Ashigbe spoke not just about the need for more education ahead of the rollout of the e-levy, but other matters, even preparedness. The telcos may have had their own challenges, which we have got wind of. What do you think about starting this thing on the 1st of May? And what do you think about the majority's reaction that whatever injunction the minority is trying to put up in the Apex Court will not wash? Your take?
Well, first of all, as far as the debate between the majority and minority is concerned, I think that is usual politics. I believe that the minority would tout the fact that they have a strong case, and you do expect the majority to downplay whatever the strength of the case may be. I think at the end of the day, it is good that we are increasingly resorting to the judiciary for interpretation on matters bordering on constitutionality. And I think that's a way of strengthening our young democracy. It's only in Africa that makes us feel as though we've gone quite far into our democracy. But if you consider the fact that some countries have been at it for 200 years, 300 years, and so on, you certainly know that ours is still a very, very young one. And we can only strengthen it by resorting to the judiciary. And I think that the comments that have come in terms of the need for the judiciary and other stakeholders to work in ways that would not undermine the integrity and the public perception of the judiciary is a very, very critical one, especially at this time where everything is about, well, go to court, or if you don't agree, go to court. I think that the independence and public confidence in the judiciary is a very, very critical thing. Now, on the issue of implementation, I think that if we indeed would want to start implementation from May 1 or 1st of May, perhaps we should be bracing ourselves for chaos, because I foresee a lot of chaos at the transaction points, be it at the banks or at the Momo joints and so on and so forth. Look, people don't just understand. Only yesterday, I asked two Momo, is it vendors or merchants where transactions are made, about what is going to happen. And they don't know, they don't understand. I mean, they are not sure whether it is when somebody comes to send money that the deduction will be made, or when somebody is withdrawing money from their wallet that the deduction will be made, and so on and so forth. So if indeed we would want to start implementation from May 1st, then I think that we should put in mechanisms to deal with the eventual chaos that we would witness.
We have got wind of the fact that the GRA, for example, may have conducted some, studies or some measures, put in place some measures ahead of D-Day. Whether rolling out on a national scale, they will be able to have everything seamless, or at least up to a certain level, is where the concern lies. But let me quickly run this by you. It was what I was going to start with you on. It has to do with what he said when he joined me last week about the agric minister and the fact that he is like a fan belt of misinformation, as in your words. And that story, by the way, has got a lot of traction. I saw it in different newspapers. It was on many online portals. Of course, we did it right here. We've heard from Bagbara Tanko, who is PRO for the Agric Ministry, and he is saying you do not have your facts right, and that, in fact, the Agric Minister, whenever he puts out information, he cross-checks with the relevant institutions and the relevant or the applicable data. How do you respond to this? And how far would you go to prove that you are in fact right?
Well, Ben, I'm really surprised that the officials who are supposed to be managing information and communications at the Agric Ministry would even dare come out to challenge the fact that the Agric Minister has on numerous occasions put out information that is completely false. In fact, because they came out maybe perhaps trying to save their faces, I think I should also indicate that, look, the same person who I suppose is the PRO of the ministry spoke to me, called me on the phone, and asked about the information that I had put out there, and if there was any way we could reconcile figures that we were relating to. And I did explain to him, look, I'm basically referencing data from your own ministry, which is contrary to what the minister has always been putting out in terms of our soya bean production levels, our maize production levels, our rice production levels. And in that call, they conceded. He and the PA to the minister both conceded that, look, yes, the figures that had been put out there, that had been put out on a number of occasions by the minister, runs contrary to the data that is available through their own research department or directorate. So I think that sometimes it may be better for these PROs to have a way of managing information without even escalating something that is devastating for their own bosses. Because the reality, it's not my data. I don't gather data. The data is from their own research department. And that is what the department or directorate exists to do, to produce accurate data for the country, to guide our policies, to guide our interventions, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So I'm saying that it is the research directorate that puts out wrong information, and that what the minister puts out there, which is contrary to what the research directorate has, is what is correct. I think that it is important that as a country, we begin. When we commit faults or errors, it is important that we admit them, and where we have to apologize, we do apologize. I read somewhere where the same Mr. Tanko had said, well, the agric minister is a human being. He cannot get it right all the time.
Right.
But that, I think, is laughable.
So he's been flip-flopping. He calls you, says one thing, and he says different things on different platforms, according to what you're saying. Well, only time will tell. I've not seen a straitjacket reaction from them, but at least this is what has been out there. And thanks for delivering that clarity there. But on page 8 of the Finder newspaper, $35 million vaccine production plant opens, and Ghana's vision of securing the much-needed vaccines through domestic vaccine development received a major boost with the commissioning of a multi-million-dollar vaccine production facility in Accra. The $35 million plant, managed by Atlantic Life Sciences Limited, is to begin the commercial manufacture of vaccines, infusions, anesthesia, eye drops, snake anti-rabies, anti-diphtheria, anti-scorpion, anti-tetanus, and anti-gangrene products for the Ghanaian market, as well as for the West African region. So some positive highlight there. But let me get to another crucial matter, Suleimana. Apart from these headlines, we're ready for e-levy on May the 1st, and I'm looking at the Daily Dispatch newspaper. We're ready for e-levy on May the 1st. Contrary to what you were sharing earlier, Bawumia to speak on Ghana's role in sharing Africa's economic transformation through digitalization, and then man caught, that foreigner, with fake $10,000, pleads guilty and fined 8,400 Ghana cedis. But here's my big story from the Daily Dispatch. There is pressure, increase our salaries, TUC to government. It's a matter we're talking about today. It has to do with the salaries, the fair wages, and the fact that the TUC is saying, don't give us any increment that is below, the inflation rate. They are looking at 19.5%. How do you digest all of these?
Well, I think that the TUC is right in that we have a government that makes it clear that we are in an economic crisis. And of course, we all do appreciate that because inflation is rising. The value of our cedi is declining. Debt to GDP ratio is at a very, very alarming rate. Unemployment is on the high. There's difficulty within the system, and people talk about that. And the last time Dr. Bawumia addressed matters relating to the economy at Yesu Chrome, at Jubilee, I think it's a Millennium City, the first thing he did was to admit that we are in difficult times as a result of a number of factors, including COVID-19, including the Russia-Ukraine war. I think what he didn't add is the fact that it also includes mismanagement over the last 5 years. And as I said, he conveniently avoided that. And of course, I don't expect that he would have added that.
Now, and if I may, just before you go on, sorry to truncate your thoughts, but the TUC itself has said that we shouldn't blame what is happening between Russia and Ukraine for our economic woes, and that we were on this path a long time ago. In their recent release, they made that categorical statement. Suleimana.
Well, to some extent, that is right. I saw the Russian embassy also make the same statement last week. But of course, whether we like it or not, there would be some implications on our country, just as it will be, other countries would have, in terms of the Russian-Ukrainian situation. But the point that I was making is that in the face of all this, we have a government that is showing no sign of austerity measures to prove that, look, as a government, we appreciate that this is happening, and therefore these are the measures that we are taking. Just last week also, the government of La Côte d'Ivoire, President Ouattara's government, President Ouattara indicated he's reducing his government to 30 ministers. 30 ministers. Yes, Ghana's population is big, but our economy, even though it's larger than that of Ivory Coast, I don't think that it is like double the size of the Ivorian economy. So if Cote d'Ivoire could run the country with 30 ministers, why can't we do with, let's say, even 60 ministers? Apart from that, we all know about the conditions of service of government officials heads of state institutions, and so on and so forth. At a time when we say the economy is not doing well and we are in crisis, what has government done to show that, look, we also appreciate the fact that Ghanaians are suffering and we are adopting these measures to save some money for the benefit of all of us? So to the extent that government is not doing that and people are still earning their fat salaries, fat allowances, living in opulence, driving all the cars that, we know they drive, and so on and so forth. I don't think that some should be sacrificing for the benefit of others. If we have to sacrifice, all of us must be sacrificing. If we have to benefit, then all of us must benefit. And to that extent, I don't think that the TUC is wrong in their demand. I think it is justified. I mean, we can only blame them if we had seen the government adopt certain measures that shows that everyone is sacrificing in the interest of the nation. So I think that they are justified in their demand. And even if they were asking for more, I believe that they will be justified.
Well, let's look at the Daily Guide newspaper now. Parliament invites memos on exemptions. A man found dead in gutter. Asante Yeboah's housing loan scheme. NPP affirms constituency confab dates. But interesting here, the headline, banner headline, if you like, for the Daily Guide today. World Bank backs government over economy. And it's interesting because you can look at this from different angles. But according to the story, government has been vindicated by the World Bank's verdict that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has added to pressures caused by the COVID-19 crisis, which are affecting economies of countries worldwide. President of the World Bank Group, David Malpass, who disclosed this recently, said the international financial institution was preparing a $170 billion package of financial help in response to the overlapping global crises of war, pandemic, and inflation that are hitting the poorest countries. But like we've also mentioned here, in fact, he has also pointed to the fact that there are certain things we ought to be doing to shore up our economy, and that we have not exactly done some things correctly over time. But of course, we can pick and choose. It depends on where you want to look and where you sit. But you look at the TUC and other entities and what they've said, and you look at this one. So we must find middle ground in there somewhere, somehow. Dangote graces Edwina's wedding reception. Has to do with the president's daughter and that famous wedding, if you like. Republic Press newspaper. Stop e-levy or face contempt at Blackwatch to GRA boss. How very quickly, Suleimana, how do you see that panning out?
Well, if I can recall, I think the case is slated for May 4.
Yes, the 4th of May.
Yes, and as far as we know now, e-levy is supposed to start on May 1st. So I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not sure whether, because Honorable Okudjeto's contention is that once they have filed the case and served all the parties, that in itself should constitute grounds for injunction or not going ahead with the implementation.
Right.
But others have said, well, the court must pronounce the injunction, which can then only happen on 4th of May. And so at this stage, not clear whether once it is served, it serves as the injunction, or the court must hear the case on the 4th of May and then say, look, on the basis of this, we order that until this matter is concluded, or until the substantive matter is concluded, the implementation should be suspended. So I think 4th of May is not that far. We can look forward to it and see what the court will say.
We'll play the waiting game. Sewa Broni's allegations, NPP not bothered over petition against Nanado. That's according to Obiri Boahin. I don't know whether you have a take on this entire development, Sewa Broni, and what has been happening. I mean, we've had instances in the past when former presidents, current presidents, the current president have been, come into the fray in this respect. But I've heard people say, for example, he has a public life as president, but he also has a private life. Why go into it? What is your take?
Well, I think it's one of those usual petty politics that you would expect people to play on. I remember under President Kufuor, we had literally a similar incident where we're told the president had gone into a relationship with a certain lady called Giselle Yazzie. Twins had been born, and then occasionally we would hear, oh, the woman is coming in with the twins, and so on and so forth. Till date, we don't know who Giselle Yazzie is and where those President Kufuor's twins are. Under President Mahama not too long ago, we heard about, the Papano incident and so on. And then when I talk about petty politics, if you remember, when that development happened, it even featured in Parliament, where the word was used and there was and so on and so forth. And now we have Sewa Broni coming up. I think it's one of those petty politics. It shouldn't really take center stage in our national discourse, because they are very, very important issues to discuss. They are matters affecting the lives of people that we need to talk about. I
wholly agree with you. My only point of departure may be, let's reflect on it. In the US, we had the situation with Monica Lewinsky and former President Bill Clinton. In our own, political, cultural context, should we get to the point where we focus on this a bit more, or should we just stick to what we have? I mean, we're trying to emulate the better democracies, right? The likes of, the United States. They had Monica Lewinsky, and look at what happened, the ignominious end of President Clinton. What do you think? Quickly on that, so we move on.
Well, I think that, of course, if there is an incident of sexual harassment or sexual abuse, or anything that undermines the authority and the reverence of the presidency, it's an important matter. I would have wished that if indeed what we are hearing is true, the lady herself filing a formal complaint, and that can be done locally, regionally, and internationally, about her rights having been abused by no less a person than the president. But to the extent that it's been about social media conversations, she being interviewed by a social media activist who is very well known to be partisan in terms of his views and all of that, it then somehow trivializes the matter. Otherwise, if the woman feels offended, feels harassed, feels that her rights have been violated, I think she has the liberty to file a formal complaint against the president or whoever she thinks abused her rights. Okay. But not doing that and resorting to these social media interviews and comments here and so on and so forth, as I said, trivializes the matter, and any conversations around it then ends up being our usual petty politics, which I don't think helps our country.
Let me just acknowledge, lest I forget, Rashid Shaban. You are watching all the way from Nigeria, live. Thank you, Rashid, for connecting with us. NBC gurus descend on AG for reprimanding colleague lawyers. I'm sure you've read and heard the AG talk about, some cases not being held in camera. And again, the bit about the fact that what he deems frivolous cases ought to be quashed, thrown out even before it gets to major stages at the court. And I've heard the likes of, I believe it is Abraham Amaliba, say that this is a dangerous trend that our AG is showing. Quick reaction?
Well, I think that, again, as I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I know it's often said that the AG, whoever occupies that position, becomes the head of the bar. And I believe that matters relating to how justice is administered and so on and so forth is an evolving issue. And there will always be debates about what is right and what is not right. Of course, because the AG is also a person holding political office, the thinking would always be that whatever he says would be something that is meant to inure to the benefit of his political party and the administration. And therefore, you would expect that others whose political interests are directly opposed to his would also have contrary views. And so I think it's about open debates, and ultimately, whatever is good for the country is what we should look at. And those of us who are independent should listen carefully, read carefully, and at the end of the day be able to make our views known in an impartial way. But at this stage, I think, again, it's politics, as usual.
Ghanaian publisher newspaper, Transport Minister, 2 others received Best Minister Award. Oda MP Chair wanted. An interesting story. E-levy has taken off, that's according to the majority. President opens $30 million 1D1F factory in Ningo Pram. And Galamsey destroys huge hectares of cocoa farms, that's according to Cocoa Board. Let's do the new publisher now. And so some of the stories are, from my own, journalistic viewpoint, a bit skewed and their titles, so I'll skip some of them. But I owe him, so I killed him. And I'm sure you've heard of the bit about a KNUST student who recently, whose life was taken. A 25-year-old tailor apprentice in Sibwa, a town in the Ashanti region, has been arrested over the murder of a 22-year-old second-year biological sciences student of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And there are some reports that it was, when you look at social media, that it was supposedly over a phone, a debt, and all of that. It's a bit of a confused hodgepodge. But some have also called for greater security for students. But the point to be made as well is that when they are not within the precincts of the university or on campus, how does the institution do that? Do you have any idea? I mean, what is your take on that?
Well, it's a very sad development. But for me, it goes down to the bigger issue about our morals as a country, and the fact that increasingly our moral values are going down and down and down. And unfortunately, we are not seeing good examples, enough good examples being exhibited by leaders. And I believe that it's time we go back to the whole question about the role and function of the NCCE, which is, for me, the foremost institution for the development of our democracy. But unfortunately, over the years, it has been ignored and it has been underfunded. I think that it should even be right to say that it's not being funded. Apart from the Kufuor government that really resourced the NCCE to do its work, the subsequent governments have all abandoned the NCCE to the point that the institution that is supposed to really educate us on our morals, educate us on civics, educate us about our constitution is being funded by, foreigners. In other words, our governments are okay saying that, look, when it comes to educating our own people in terms of moral values, in terms of civic education, in terms of our constitution, it's okay to abandon that. If the foreign or Western partners care, they can do that. Right. And I think that it's time we go back to that. Otherwise, we'll continue seeing these sad and unfortunate developments.
My final bit to you, in maybe some 30 seconds, if you can. BNFT, to tax or not to tax, GRA in a fix over churches. What is your quick take on this? Should churches be taxed?
Well, I think that where we are getting to and the kinds of things that we see with our churches, maybe some sort of regulation would get us to the point where we would be clear whether to tax or not to tax. But at this stage, well, a church remains a church. And if the laws are that churches are not supposed to be taxed, it's going to be a very difficult thing to do. What is important is to perhaps look carefully into the activities of our churches and find out whether some regulatory mechanisms need to be put in place to be able to identify whether an activity by a church constitutes, something that is directly aligned to the objectives of a church, or it's an economic venture, for which reason there must be taxes.
Brilliant thoughts there, and it's always good to have you share them. But thank you so much, Suleimana, and I wish you the best of the Ramadan and this Monday morning.
Thank you very much, Ben. Have a great day.
Thank you. All right, so that's how we draw the curtains on the news review. Up next, sports. Do stay.